there is a beautiful economic analysis called the longevity dividend. And I'm not sure if your audience is familiar with it or not.
Yeah, let's hear about the longevity dividend.
Sure. Yeah. So it describes what happens to GDP and economically when one average healthy year of life expectancy is added to a population.
Okay.
And there are a number of iterations of the longevity dividend out there, but generally the range for added GDP for one extra year of healthy life expectancy is between $3-ish to $38 trillion.
Now let me get this straight. This is for if you added 1 year of healthy lifespan to every individual in the country. Is that what we're
exactly
saying? Okay,
exactly.
Got
it. Everybody understands GDP. Everybody understands why GDP would go up, right? When you break it down, it becomes very obvious.
Sure.
If we can keep people out of hospitals and participating in the economy, that's a grower of GDP, right?
Yeah, you take away the minuses and you continue to compound the pluses.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the greatest incentive driver of any, that those numbers there are compelling as any number you can think of or study.
That's surprisingly compelling. Like I would not have guessed that. I would have said, oh, it's going to be some billions. If you're talking about everybody in the country, it's going to be some billions of dollars, but 37 trillion.
Mm-hmm. That's the high range. That's the high range.
I was going to say that's like the size of the entire economy, if I'm not mistaken.
Like one and a half times the size of the U.S.
Right. It's actually about equal to the national debt. So, right, which is we won't get into that conversation, but it's a phenomenal impact. It's a phenomenal impact when you look at it that way, right?
It really. And what I say,
do people agree with you that this is what it is on the high end? What's the low end?
About like 2.7 trillion.
Okay. So it's pretty widespread.
Yeah, it's widespread, but regardless of what it is, an extra $3 trillion to the U.S.'s GDP is substantial.
It's
right?
massive. Yeah.
It's massive. Yeah. And that's for 1 year, right? That's so what happens when we do this for 5 years or 10 years, right?
I'll bet there's something here. If you do it for 5 years, it's more than additive. It probably has a compounding element. Is that math have been done also?
In that $37 trillion paper,
mm-hmm.
They also look at what would happen if it was increased to 10 years, and it's about $370 trillion.
Oh, so they did it a little bit more, just straight multiplication.
Right.
Okay.
Which those numbers to me also are like, wow, I can't even wrap my head around $370 trillion. That's an impossible number for people to wrap their heads around.
Yeah.
But the importance of that paper is not the number; it's the fact that any amount of trillions is worth it here, because there's the other end of the spectrum is obviously economic, but moral, right? We have a moral duty as a government, as a society, to keep people healthy for as long as possible. The reason why we have houses and we have jobs and cars, and the cars have seatbelts, and we have pharmacies and doctors and etc. We've built society to keep people alive, right? So this is part of what we've been doing for our entire history.
Yeah, and I think the moral mandate is there. Unfortunately, when you look at the government, it hasn't always aligned with the moral mandate, right? I think this is where economic interests come in. So let's look at it through a selfish economic perspective, because that's many times the lens that is looked at through. If you're doing, let's get the low end of it. Let's say you're doing 2.7, let's round it up to $3 trillion. What's interesting about that is if you look at what the healthcare spend is, right, in a given year, it's about, what is it now, $4 or $5 trillion?
Yep.
So if you're adding 3 trillion, you've actually, let's say you're invested in, you make a lot of money out of that 5 trillion that gets spent, right? Because you're invested in sick care and keeping people sick, or whatever scenario people want to talk about. But if there's another 3 trillion coming in, it's like, oh my gosh, well, there's an opportunity. We're going to more than offset what we lose on one side by what we're going to be able to gain on the other side, plus the added wisdom of people as they advance through life being healthy, right? Because I think this is the other piece that's missed, is that we have this perception, this is in the longevity space for sure. We have this perception that as people age, they decline. But in true longevity, as people age, and our concept of longevity is to end up with a 30-year-old body and a 300/3,000-year-old mind, right? Mm-hmm. So not only do you get that economic return, but now you're getting the psychospiritual, intellectual wisdom return of people that are older, but now have greater perspective and can bring more wisdom into the economy, into the country itself, right? So I think that's really probably difficult to measure, but I think that's also massive.
Absolutely. And just a slight digression, I've always believed that our politicians should be of older ages. They are the ones who have seen the most and the ones that have experienced the most. But the barrier for an effective older politician is the fact that their physical declines.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and so if we can remedy that, we can gain from their experience and wisdom. That's right. Without having to watch people, fall down and stop speaking and things like that.
So when you go to Washington and you roll this concept out of the longevity dividend, and let's say you roll out 37 trillion, I'm sure people look at you a little bit cockeyed. Even mm-hmm. if you rolled out 3 trillion, mm-hmm. you would still get people's attention. Mm-hmm. And maybe even with a little more credibility.
Mm-hmm. And I always give a range.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Got it. So, but what's the reception that you get when you talk to people about this? How do people look at that?
It's like you said, a little bit of bewilderment, a little bit of amusement. It's almost an unbelievable number. Mm-hmm. The 37 trillion is at least right.
Right.
And so partially, that's why I give a range, but mm-hmm. also I make sure to hammer home that no matter what the actual number is, we know what the range is. If it's $10 trillion, that is still more than worth shooting for. Our national healthcare expenditure by 2028 is projected to hit, I believe, $7.5 trillion. So we also frame this in the kind of context of we're approaching the edge of a cliff here, right? This is a cliff that every country in the world is facing, but America too. We're spending more money than anybody else on healthcare costs. So we should be the most focused on increasing longevity and delivering next generation therapeutics and interventions to get us there.
Yeah. Well, there's that statement in itself is very multifaceted as to why we're spending more than any other country. That being said, even taking all that just simply at face value, you would think that from a moral perspective, there would be a reason to look at it. I guess the question I'm asking, though, is with people's financial incentives because they have stock in one company or another company or a company that's benefiting from one situation or another situation. I've found that people tend to be short-sighted. They tend to be selfish and short-sighted. And I don't think humans are particularly bright, quite honestly, for this reason. We're not a particularly bright species, which is why we're on the verge of running ourselves into bankruptcy and maybe blowing ourselves up or creating an AI that could wipe us all out, right? So that being said, I think I'm just curious how you are able to speak to people in a way that actually gets them to buy into a bigger vision of goodness for themselves, right?